Hi, and welcome to the Paris Dictionary Classroom Foundational Talk as part of the Para Educator Conference series for 2026. This session is a beginner type session. Let's dive in. On the screen, you'll see the session description that you signed up for. If you want to pause and read this in its entirety, it is there for you, but I just wanted to make sure it was available for you to be able to access easily. As part of this series for the Para Educator Conference, the sessions are aligned with the Para Educator competencies for credentials. So there is an image on the right-hand side of the screen that is a clickable image that will open up that PDF available from Patton. But this session is going to cover Core Competency 5, Instructional Supports and Strategies, specifically the two sub-areas of supporting and implementing a range of instructional strategies to facilitate students' learning that address IEPs, and follow written instructional plans and implementing accommodations, modifications, and reinforcing concepts. My name is Melissa Oberdorf. I know you don't see me on the screen, but this is a picture of me. I work at the Lincoln Intermediate Unit 12 in South Central Pennsylvania. I am a staff developer for our team working with training and consultation, or TAP, and we are in the Student Services Department. My email address is there. Please feel free to reach out. Today's session is really taking a reflective approach to learning. So I like to state that at the beginning and let people know, because there is some different aspects of this training. It might already remind you of some things you know, but we're hoping that it's going to refine something that you're doing but could do a little bit better, or reaffirm something you're doing really well and you want to continue doing to support the students you work with in your teams. So welcome and how to use this session. Your handout is available called the Paris Dictionary. It looks like this on the right. If you're looking at the slides, this is a clickable force copy image that you can click on. There's different reflection pauses throughout, so please feel free to use the notes section of the guide to support you. Today's agenda, we're going to start by talking about the IEP universe, then going into classroom language, and finally making it real before takeaways and wrap-ups. The learning outcomes for this session are: identify at least 3 terms from today's session that are new to you, reflect on past experiences with unfamiliar vocabulary and describe what you would do differently today, and select 1 term to use more confidently this week and write a specific plan on how you'll practice it. Depending on when your school year starts or when you're watching this, you might not be doing it this week, but thinking about when you're getting back into the classroom. So starting off, why does vocabulary matter so much? At the core, and before I go into it, this image is really helping to illustrate the fact that understanding the language of education really is that first step to full inclusion for us and for our students, whether that's in the classroom or in society as a whole, because we start building that and learning that within the classroom. So when we know the words that we understand, that's really helping with the why behind our work. That shared vocabulary is going to build those stronger partnerships, and we're going to talk about those a little bit later. But whether it's with your student, with the classroom teacher in a gen ed or special ed setting, or working or talking with parents, maybe at drop off. Also, it signals that professionalism. So it makes sure that you are seen as a valuable and competent member of the team, knowing those different aspects and terms and how to use them and how to best support the team in the work that they're doing with students. We're going to take a look at some different things later, but let's say that a teacher says to you, implement his SDI during small group in the LRE per his IEP. You might be thinking, well, what does that even mean? So let's dig into that a little bit more. So lost in translation. You can just write some notes in front of you, but per Marcus's IEP, maybe during tier 2 pullout, implement his SDI using scaffolded graphic organizers in his LRE to support his progress on his annual goal. You might be thinking, well, what does that even mean? So take a moment and think about what you think that actually means. Pause if you need to. And then we're going to go into the translation. The translation is really going to address these terms, right? IEP, tier 2 pullout, SDI, and LRE. According to Marcus's learning plan, when he receives extra small group support and help outside the main classroom, teachers should use his specialized learning strategies. So for Marcus, that looks like step-by-step visual charts, while helping to keep him in the most inclusive classroom environment as possible in order to help him reach his yearly learning goal. So we really try to break down those terms without using them in the translation or definition itself. So the IEP is that personal learning plan. Tier 2 pullout for this looks like extra small group support. SDI, specially designed instruction, we're going to get to, is specifically for this student, those step-by-step visual charts. And LRE, least restrictive environment, is keeping him in the most inclusive environment as possible to help support his growth. So we're going to move into the IEP universe. So I just have this graphic to kind of center us and some of the main things that we're going to talk about. So part 1 is going to be must-know terms. These are the terms that you're probably going to hear most often and are going to be most critical. You have a section in your guide to add other vocab. These words are in there in the dictionary, but if there's other things that come up because your district has other specific terminology they use, I just want to remind you there is a place to put that in there. IEP stands for Individualized Educational Program, and it's the student's legal roadmap for special education. So only students that are in special ed have an IEP. FAPE is free appropriate public education. It's every student's legal right. So students all have an access and a legal right to FAPE. LRE, least restrictive environment, the most inclusive setting that meets that student's needs. So that might not be the most inclusive setting that is the same for every student. So it might not be alongside general ed peers all day long or in a general ed classroom, but it's as appropriate that meets the student's needs. And SDI, specially designed instruction, teaching tailored things specifically to this student's disability-related needs. There might be students that have similar disability-related needs, and so the SDI might apply to multiple of them, but specially designed instruction is instruction that is supporting that student's areas. Now we've got the essential terms. So you might hear these, but probably, little different ways to use them or ways that they're being used around you is PLAF. So present levels of functional performance. If you're working with a teacher that has been in education a very long time, you might hear the word PLOP, P-L-O-P, because it used to be PLOP in IEPs, but now it's PLAF. So present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Most teachers, when they're talking about it on the fly, just say the present levels. And that's where the student is academically and functionally right now. BIP or FBA. BIP is a behavior intervention plan, FBA, functional behavior assessment, and that is supporting students with behavior. So they might be doing an assessment to determine the root cause of behavior and then might implement a BIP to support that student. ESY, especially the end of the school year or after January, it really starts to come up, is extended school year. So summer services that students may be eligible for. Not all students are eligible and not all families take the district up on that, but that is what ESY is. Some more essential terms. Accommodations. We're really going to get into these some more in another session, but accommodations is changing how a student accesses the learning. So the content's staying the same, but how they access it is different. Modifications, it's a change in what is expected. So the content itself is going to change. Related services, OT, PT, SLP, counseling, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language pathologists, those are also in your dictionary spelled out for you, but these are going to be specialists that are supporting the student. IEP goals and progress monitoring, what the student is working towards and how we are measuring it. So a student might have an IEP goal for math, and you might be supporting the data collection for maybe something like fact fluency. So we've gotten to our first generative question. So you see the pause on the screen. So I'm going to ask you to do something. So here is what I'm asking. I want you to open your Paris dictionary handout that you have that I shared at the beginning, and it has a graphic with the title on it earlier in the slides. And I want you to look at that. And I want you to circle 3 terms that are new to you. I just went through some key terms and we're going to get into some more, but there's lots of terms in there. So maybe you've heard them, but you didn't know exactly what the letter stood for. So that's what I want you to do right now. So go ahead, pause right now and engage in that. All right, now we're going to move into section 2, classroom language. So language that might be used in the classroom, whereas the first set of essential could be used in the classroom, but it might be used more in conversation with you and a supporting teacher. General ed terms that you're going to hear daily. So differentiated instruction, teaching that meets each student where they are. So this is something that might happen in a general ed classroom, in a special ed classroom, but these are general terms that you're going to hear regularly. Scaffolding is temporary supports to build the student towards independence. Scaffold should always eventually be faded, but that's not something that you have to determine how to do that. That'll be shared with you from the IEP team, but we always want to build independence in our students. Co-teaching, two educators sharing one classroom. That's typically a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, and they're both supporting all the students in their learning. Formative assessment, checking understanding during the learning. So if teachers are doing exit tickets, thumbs up, thumbs down, quick little check-ins, that's to make sure that students are gathering the learning they need in the moment. And summative assessment, measuring what was learned after instruction. So that could be tests, projects, those bigger things that are kind of wrapping up a section. The support system. MTSS, RTI. So MTSS stands for multi-tiered systems of supports. RTI is response to intervention. Like I said, both of those are also in your dictionary with more information, but your district or your school is probably going to have MTSS or RTI, response to intervention, layered into the school support framework. So there's some different components that go along with that too, such as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So the intensity of support. So tier 1 is something that all students should be getting access to. Small group would be tier 2. And then tier 3 is typically more of an intensive individual. It might be like 2 individuals and a reading specialist, or 2 individuals and a para working on something specifically, but it's usually much more intensive and regular and high support for students. Progress monitoring, we started to talk about. And that's something with where we're regularly checking in on how a student is responding to instruction and when data is collected. So progress monitoring might happen in a special education setting specifically, and or in a tier 1 setting. So we just talked about those summative and formative assessments, but if students are getting tier 2 small group or tier 3 intensive supports from a reading specialist or from another individual, they're going to be collecting data too to see how those students are responding to the support given. Data-driven instruction just means literally what it sounds like, using the students' data to guide the teaching decisions that are happening. UDL is Universal Design for Learning. That's going to be a proactive teaching that's going to work for all learners. So that's just there's a lot more that goes into UDL, but just so that you are hearing the term UDL, because it's a buzzword, it's a term now used a lot, means Universal Design for Learning. And inclusive practices. Inclusive practices are teaching approaches that support access and belonging for every student. So they go a lot of times hand in hand with UDL. So UDL is an example of an inclusive practice. AT is another, accessible technology is another example of like an inclusive practice. And, having students in the least restrictive environment, the LRE. So those are some examples of inclusive practices. So now that we've got that under control, now we've got generative question 2. So there is a spot again in your notes for you to reflect on this question. It's on that very last page, and it has generative question 1, 2, and 3, a spot for you to reflect. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to reflect on, think of a time that a teacher used a term that you did not understand. And I want you to think, okay, you heard that term, you didn't understand it. What did you do in that moment? And now that you have this dictionary, you have some of these words that you're hearing and someone's explicitly telling you them, you don't have to furtively Google them in the corner. What could you do now with the vocabulary that you've learned or the tools that you've learned? So pause, take a few minutes and jot down what you could do with that new learning that you have gained. All right, making it real and wrapping it up. So we've talked about these terms. We've kind of rapid fired through different ones that are, critical ones that they're used in the classroom. So how does this really start to connect to you in your daily life, making it real and daily supports? So there's lots of different times that these terms could come up and show up in your day. One of those is in the morning. Maybe the teacher that you're working with is reviewing IEP accommodations before class starts. So maybe there's a math test today and she's reviewing with you what some of the accommodations are that you are going to be helping to support since you support math class, to make sure students get things like extended time, chunking of their assignment so that they know all the different directions for the parts they're being asked to do. Might show up during instruction. So supporting SDI, remember that specially designed instruction in the general ed classroom, which for most students is going to be that least restrictive environment, but not all students. So you might be using some of these terms, scaffolding, tier 2 things while you're helping with that student's instruction. Data time. Lots of paras are tasked with supporting data collection. So logging student progress towards IEP goals. I've had many paras that I work with and supported that come into my classroom and they observe a student for behavior data and they have a checklist and they're looking for certain things during a certain amount of time that I'm working with that student so that they can collect that data. Team meetings. Using the shared vocabulary and the terminology that we've been talking about today is really going to help you feel more confident and comfortable when you're talking with teachers and specialists in team meetings when we're discussing and supporting our learners. And last is parent interactions. In my experience, a lot of paras get FaceTime with families, whether it's at drop-offs or pickups, during lunches if they're coming in and having lunch with their kid at school, or tons of other opportunities. So explaining what the student worked on using professional language, that's not the main goal of your job, but it's definitely a situation you might get put in. So being able to just talk with that family, and when they ask, how did the math test go today? What kind of things happened? And you want to be able to share, you can use the terminology in a way that makes you feel confident and competent as a para. With all that being said, though, I know we've gone through the session. You've got the dictionary. But remember, it's okay and professional to ask. It really, really is. Asking clarifying questions is a sign of professionalism, not weakness. Let's take that again, friends. Asking clarifying questions is a sign of professionalism, not weakness. You are not expected to know every term immediately. I have been in education for years, in special education for years, working with administrators and supervisors and district admin. And sometimes a district has an acronym that they use that other districts don't use. And I have to ask them, like, hey, hold on a second. You're using this acronym. What does this mean? Or maybe they're using an acronym that maybe we don't typically use as an acronym, like honestly, direct instruction. Or differentiated instruction. Some districts use DI for direct instruction or differentiated instruction. Or most places don't use an acronym at all for differentiated instruction. They just say differentiated instruction. So it's okay to ask because everyone uses things a little differently at times. The ones we went over today are the main ones that are used pretty standardly, but it's not uncommon to come across words that you don't know, even if you've been a para for a while. But here's some strategies to put in your toolbox to support you if and when you're unsure about a term. Ask your cooperating teacher or special ed teacher. If you're sitting in a team meeting, you don't feel comfortable asking, jot it down, ask them later. Use your para's dictionary handout as your personal reference. There's a ton more terms, and I tried to organize them by different sections than what we went over today because I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the options, but it is there and available for you. Or write new terms in the notes section, right? That last page we talked about has a spot for you to write new terms. And as you encounter them, jot them down there, look them up later, talk to your cooperating teacher, come back to them. Because like I said, each district sometimes has their own phrasing and terminology that might not be in this guide. One thing, again, we're going to say it a third time, friends. Asking clarifying questions is a sign of professionalism, not weakness. So if somebody uses a term you're not sure about, you say, hey, I heard you say blah, blah, blah. What does that mean to you? Tell me more. Ask clarifying questions to support you and your students. All right, generative question 3. If you're looking in your notes, you'll see the third is the final one that there's a section to write some things down about. So you are exactly right. This is the last generative question for our time together. What is one term from today that you want to start using more confidently? Go ahead, jot it down, and brainstorm one way you'll practice it this week. So maybe the term is LRE. So you're going to write down LRE and then maybe an arrow or something and how you're going to use it this week or in the classroom the next time you're there to support the students that you're working with. So go ahead and pause now and engage in that. So as we're wrapping up, again, that takeaway, your Paris dictionary. So I shared it with you earlier in the slides. It looks like this. This is a forced copy click link. You should have access to it. If you don't, my email's here. Please, please, please reach out to me if you're having any issues at all. Your glossary handout is that personal guide. Keep it handy. There's tons of different terms on there. You can use it again during meetings, team planning, daily classroom support. And remember, there's that blank My Dictionary section in the back that you can add new terms to support your learning. Share it with a colleague. You have lots of colleagues that are doing these sessions, but they might not have been able to come to every one. So maybe even if they're a more experienced para and you might not think this is valuable to them, share it with them anyway. They might be able to get some use out of it or be able to share it with someone else they know. And remember, it's a living document. When you make that forced copy, that's your copy. You can add or do whatever you want to it in the future. As we're wrapping up, I just want to refresh and remind you on those learning outcomes. By the end of today's session, you identified some terms that are new to you, reflected on past experiences with unfamiliar vocab, and described what you're going to do differently using the strategies from today. And you just selected for generative question 3, one term you want to use more confidently this week and a plan for how you are going to implement that. Thank you so much for joining me for this session, the Paris Dictionary Classroom Foundational Talk. Again, my name is Melissa Oberdorf and I work at Lincoln Intermediate Unit 12. There is my email address if you're having any issues accessing the Paraeducator Dictionary Guide, or if there's any other resources I can give to support you, please feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you.